wonderful humanity. My name is Darren, and I want to share a spiritual talk today on a subject that's a little left field. It's something that I want to be sharing more about as I move forward because I believe it's vital information for all of us to know, especially as we navigate the real chaos of our times right now as we're moving into that ninth wave of galactic consciousness, as the Mayans had portended in 2012 in their brilliant calendar. We are now in the age of unity consciousness. And for those of you who follow my work, one of the odysseys that I've been on, one of the great missions of my life, in fact, in my adult life, has been this 10-year plus journey into exploring the roots of the European indigenous culture. This was a journey I was set upon by a Mohawk teacher I had, who said this is vital for especially those who are descended of the white race, of the European race, to really understand the roots of colonialism and how we've gotten to this culmination of colonialism with the environmental devastation that we've wreaked on the dear planet Earth. Now, something that happened to me when I first set upon this journey is I stumbled upon an incredible book by an author called John Lam Lash. And this book is an extrapolation of the Nag Hammadi Library. The Nag Hammadi Library was a series of texts, very fragmented texts that were written in ancient Greek or Coptic, that were discovered in 1945 in Upper Egypt by a farmer who was literally just digging in his ground, and he found these urns with these texts. These texts are incredibly profound. I've been studying them mostly through the gaze of John Lam Lash, who I see as a real expert on these texts. And I've been studying the information in these texts for a number of years now, and there's a wealth of really radical but very relevant information in those texts that I believe needs to be revealed more to the public so that we have a real understanding of what's really going on this planet. Because let me tell you, these texts really get to the nitty-gritty of the essence of things. And one of the most important things that these texts talk about is this idea of what's called the Archons. So the Archons are depicted in these texts as beings that actually were existing or came into existence before human beings. Archons literally means the ones that came before. And these Archons are said to be a kind of nemesis of humanity. And they work more in an interdimensional way, interfacing with our consciousness and disrupting our consciousness from perceiving reality clearly and be able to use the divine powers of our logical thinking and even the right use of our emotions to be a guiding light to leading virtuous lives. And I don't say the word virtuous as just a light descriptor. If you look at Taoism, the book, the Tao Te Ching, literally means the way of virtue. Virtue is the essence of our universe. In Taoist numerology, virtue connotes to the number 1, which means that virtue itself is an energy that was inherently a part of that one energy that then split into 2, the yin and the yang, and the 2 split into the 3 treasures, Shen, Jing, and Qi, and from the 3, the whole universe was spawned in all its multifarious ways. So the 1 is relevant, and virtue is said to be literally translated from Taoism, the word D-E, with an accent, and it means in Chinese, the marvelous impulses. Marvelous because they are the impulses that marvelously manifest unity or that sense of oneness on our planet, which is really profound. So virtue is very important to cultivate. And these Archons are these entities that actually take us off the proper path of our unfoldment of an evolutionary species. So let me backtrack a little to let you know more about the Nag Hammadi Library. So they were written by what is known as Gnostics. Now, a lot of people have connected Gnosticism to a form of Christianity, but this is actually not the case at all. Gnosticism is, as Mr. Lash says, an alternative to religion itself. To be a Gnostic literally means to know as the gods know, to be self-realize, as the yogis would say. And this is all of our birthright. We are supposed to come into a real divine heritage, a real divine knowing and understanding of what we are and what the universe is, a kind of godly knowing, if you will. This is kind of resembled in a lot of archetypal forms, as in the magician, someone like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, or Merlin, someone who knows a heck of a lot about very important things and is filled with a kind of wisdom and sagacity that is very, very useful. They become leaders to the culture because wisdom is truly the most precious resource of the planet. And it's interesting that these Gnostics who wrote the Nag Hammadi Library, they were devoted to the goddess that they saw as inhabiting, or being rather, Earth. Earth is seen to be her physical material body, but she has a soul body as well, a living light that encompasses the Earth, which you can actually see in some satellite images, the atmospheres that surround the Earth. It's her living aura, her body, her ethereal body. The word Sophia is actually from an ancient Greek word that means wisdom, interestingly enough. And the word philosophy means love of wisdom, which I find really, really profound. So for them, wisdom was not only our birthright, but it was actually the quality of the goddess that is Earth, that she's trying to imbue in us. We're literally living in this giant goddess body creatrix. Now, the Nag Hammadi Library talks a lot about these Archons because they say that we're in a very dire situation on the planet, in the sense that we have a kind of predatory species that is invading the human collective consciousness, and it's trying to disrupt us and take us off of our path. This alien, they call it an alien species of life, these Archons are quite malevolent. They hate something in our humanity. They are envious, rather, which is interesting because when you read different cosmologies such as Christianity and the origin of Lucifer or Satan, the first fall of Satan was he felt envy towards human beings because God asked Lucifer and the angels to serve this new creation, humanity, to really help them and support them. And there was a kind of moment where Lucifer, rather than choosing to support, thought, hey, does this mean you love them more than us because they're somehow more worthy than us, that we have to serve them kind of like slaves? It's interesting. I've fixated on this idea a lot because one of the books that I'm writing is about the nature of evil. And when I think about this through my own belief systems, what I really bear down on is this is seemingly one of the first moments of mental illness on the level of the angels, because why would Lucifer, out of all the angels who are very dutiful servants of this beautiful creation that we all live in, why would he all of a sudden go against that program and see this as a lack of lovingness? So I really extrapolated from that the root of evil is really a lack of love. And that's why love in the teachings of Jesus and many other mystics is all about love, because love is the great healer. It's what every being in the universe lives. We live in an ocean of love. When someone loses sight of that or loses connection to that, suffering entails, and suffering can lead to pain, and pain can lead to all kinds of acts of evil from that seeming turmoil and chaos within the being. So these Archons are said to have this similar characteristic as Lucifer, which I find interesting. You start to see that there is a universal sensibility of knowledge and truth that is emerging in this precious age that we live in. This is one of the boons of our age, that we have this kind of ability to zoom out thanks to things like the internet, where we have the ability to pool all of our knowledge and wisdoms together, and we start to have the ability to make connections and start to see that we're all speaking about the same thing. And in my studies of the nature of evil and this idea of a predatory or invasive species that's been acting upon humanity, you do start to see these similar themes of envy and a lack of love. So the Archons, the story of the Archons is rather interesting. There's a whole story that they call the fallen goddess scenario. And I won't go into all the details right now, but to give you a brief sort of hint about what these Gnostics, these ancient Europans or indigenous European seers were saying. And to really be clear, from the research that's being done, and I mean, this goes really far back, so it gets kind of murky to know precisely what was going on, but generally there's an understanding that the knowledge that I'm sharing right now was not just European. There was a kind of Eurasian connection as well, where Europe and Asia were sharing a lot of ideas. And there's even beliefs that there was more of a universal culture that existed in the far, far back annals of history. In the Vedic culture, in the Vedas from India, they actually do talk about a time called Sanatana Dharma, the time of universal religion, when all of humanity really believed a sense of universal truth, a kind of golden age. And according to the cycles of time in India's version of a galactic calendar, if you will, we are right now moving from an iron age to a golden age, from a dark age to a light age. So that's why we're starting to see these blossoms of universal consciousness. And it's beautiful. It's to me, one of the most beautiful things to apprehend, because it starts to give you a sense of that loving connection between all humanity, that we're all actually speaking the same terms, though through the diverse nuances of culture and traditions, which are also important to recognize. We don't want to create a blanket monoculture where we forget about all that diversity. But the real challenge right now is how can we share our diversity while at the same time weaving this sense of unity together and sharing our ideas, where we can see, your creation story is the same as mine, just told in a different way. Those are beautiful moments when those happen. So in this ancient Gnostic creation story, it is said that the goddess that is Earth actually created humanity in the pleroma, which is that ball of light in the middle of the spiraling arms of the galaxy. And the pleroma is said to be where the Aeons live, which is a more ancient name for gods and goddesses. It really translates as divine rays of creation, or forces of creation. And they create worlds and life and then send them out into the galactic arms, where it steps down in dimensionality into more material realms where life can really proliferate in those dimensions. And it is said that this goddess Sophia created humanity and then sent us out. And there's a bit of murkiness about this subject, but apparently there was like 9 strains of humanity, and none of them actually were able to survive living in the ecosystem of the galaxy. And so it was the 10th strain that Sophia really wanted to survive, and she actually went against natural cosmic law and left the pleroma and came to this point in the galaxy. And she started to actually form into a planet because she was away from her ethereal nature. And that's just how time and space works. When you move away from that pleroma, you're actually moving through dimensions. And she found herself in this much more material dimension, far away from the ethereal nexus of her home, although home is the universe. And she began to form into this planet, and it was agonizing for her. And that's why we know for the first long period of time, the Earth was literally just volcanoes and seething lava. It was literally Sophia freaking out. And one of the things she was also freaking out about was when she stopped at this station in the galaxy, a layer of her light actually went on and started as inertia and fertilized all these inorganic particles. And it gave life, according to the Nag Hammadi Library, to 2 beings that were grouped together under the term Archons. One of them is said to be kind of lizard-like, or a cross between a reptile and a lion, which is interesting because there's all these reptilian conspiracy theories about aliens and such. And the other was said to look like kind of like an aborted human fetus with big black eyes, which has been connoted to the greyhead aliens. So it's interesting to see in this thousands of years old text that they're talking about these 2 very popular alien species that many people have seen and encountered and write and talk about, especially in conspiracy circles. Now, it's said because these Archons weren't made with divine intention, they are lacking what we have. And we have what's known as the epinoa, which is a kind of divine spark. And the nature of the divine spark is creativity. It gives us the ability to be novel and brilliant in our creativity and our imagination. The Archons do not have that. And it is said that the Archons realized that, and when they saw this light beaming in us, they were of a much dimmer light, if you will. They wanted that light. They were like drawn to it, like moths to a flame, in a kind of very primal way, because they weren't made with the same divine intention as us. The Archons are also described as being very primal, very emotional in their nature, if you will, filled with actually anger. And the Archons are also supposed to be of the nature that they cannot create new things, but they can replicate certain things, which is very interesting to note. But they are very, they have this ability to interface with our consciousnesses, which is where the danger happens. And they also say that the nature of the Archons is not evil. The Gnostics were very, very, very clear on this, because they saw the problem. If you start to call something evil, then you're inevitably creating this war between good and evil. Rather, what they saw in a more compassionate, and I would say even more intelligent way, is they regarded it as a kind of insanity or psycho or sociopathy that the Archons had. And one can, open one's heart to actually feel some compassion for these Archons. They were created by accident, and they lack the ability to be as clear thinking and as creative as us. And because they were not made with divine intention, they do have a kind of inherent, essential mental illness, which was really personified as a kind of megalomania. They described that there was one Archon more than the others who absorbed most of Sophia's power and literally deemed itself, it looked around the solar system at all the planets and deemed itself the ruler of this galaxy, which is again a sign of megalomania and narcissism and mental illness. So it's really interesting to see that. And they actually go on to say, which really got them into a lot of trouble and pronounced heretics, and why Gnostics and pagans by 200 AD were punishable by death in the Roman Christian Empire. They went on to say that God, and then eventually Allah and Yahweh, so the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian God, the Abrahamic God, basically, that they all follow in some shape or form, was just this imposter kind of demonic entity, this head Archon, which was, wow, a really controversial thing to say, but very important if one is trying to get a sense of what's really going on in our dramatic situation as human beings. So the Gnostics were heavy-duty, disciplined people, very into meditation and rituals, and particularly rituals and initiations that interface them with the consciousness of the earth, because they regarded that, wow, this is a very dangerous situation. Our minds are actually very open, and if we aren't vigilant through meditation, we can actually be injected or programmed by belief systems by the Archons. And it's interesting to note that the Gnostics say that human beings are very good-natured and that we are supposed to just unfold gracefully into virtue. But as we see nowadays, we have huge mental health problems, narcissism, megalomania, sociopathy, psychopathy. A lot of the leaders of our world exude this, and they're the ones who are being the huge proponents of destroying our planet. It's interesting to think that perhaps a lot of this is because we were initially colonized on the level of mind by the Archons, and then the colonialism which we've all been trying to transmute on the planet, because it's been one of the most insane programs that we've run as a species, colonizing each other, destroying people in the name of state and religion to conquer other human beings that are really our family, that we should love and see brotherhood and sisterhood with, see unity with. Perhaps the Gnostics are trying to say that this is part of an Archon programming, a kind of what they call mind viruses that have been implanted in us over years and years and years, particularly peoples who have been vulnerable and have lost touch with these ancient mystery school Gnostic traditions, who knew this information and from a young age would train human beings to be very clear of mind, to be very mindful and vigilant, so that we would be able to discern when the thoughts that we're having are our own and when they are not, when they are perhaps intrusions from other beings. To me, this is incredibly relevant information. We need to be aware of this context, because we are right now trying to do the most immense work possible, which is trying to save this planet from our own psychopathic clutches. And to me, this piece is super relevant. It needs to be talked about in wider circles. The whole idea of psychic predation of entities, this needs to become common knowledge. We need to teach our children about this, that meditation is also an act of self-defense, that there is an element of spirituality that is inherently pragmatic. It's not just a bunch of hippies going to Burning Man. No, this is about using spirituality as a means and as a methods to empower ourselves and to be able to really know, and to know that the heritage of wisdom is something that we need to be preciously passing from generation to generation. And we need to honor these ancestral wisdoms of the Gnostics and ask ourselves, what were our ancestors trying to teach us, and what responsibility do we have now that their knowledge and wisdom in the Nag Hammadi Library is open for us all. So I'm going to leave it there. I've talked for over 20 minutes. It's a long time, but I just wanted to send that out as an idea. I am working on some writings on this, and there's lots of people who are talking about this. So if you start to do your own research, John Lam Lash, his book, Not in His Image, I highly, highly recommend it. He really, really digs deep into the Nag Hammadi Library and all of this material. And moving forward, I want to share more and more about this, because this is truly going to take a concerted effort of collective humanity to really address this situation. So until then, sending you much love, much virtue, and hope that you can sit with this information, write comments, ask me questions, and we can create dialogues and discussions around it. And the words of the Knights of the Templar, be glorious.